When I returned from a business trip, my son-in-law had sold my $13 million mansion without authorization. He handed me a $5,000 check and said, "This is the crumb you deserve. Enough to survive on the street." I just laughed and told him the shocking truth. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Paul, and at 58 years old, I thought I had seen every kind of betrayal life could offer. I was wrong. The flight from Chicago had been delayed 3 hours, and all I wanted was to get home to my mansion in the hills, pour myself a glass of the good scotch, and review the contracts I'd secured during my week-long business trip. The pharmaceutical deal I'd just closed would net my company another $12 million over the next 2 years. Not bad for a guy who started with nothing but a high school diploma and an unstoppable work ethic. As my Uber pulled up the familiar winding driveway, something felt off. The house looked different somehow. Emptier. The gardening crew's truck wasn't there, which was strange for a Tuesday. Maria's car was missing too, and she'd been my housekeeper for over 15 years. She never missed a day. I paid the driver and dragged my suitcase to the front door, fishing for my keys. That's when I noticed the lockbox hanging from the door handle. My blood ran cold. "What the hell?" I muttered, trying my key. It didn't work. I walked around to the back, where I kept a spare hidden under a fake rock by the pool. The entire backyard had been cleared out. My custom outdoor kitchen, the Italian marble table set I'd imported last year, even the goddamn pool furniture, all gone. My hands were shaking as I used the spare key on the back door. It worked, but the house was completely empty. Not just empty, stripped bare. The hardwood floors echoed with each step I took through rooms that had once been filled with a lifetime of possessions. The Persian rugs my late wife had chosen, the artwork we'd collected over 20 years of marriage, the grandfather clock that had belonged to my father, everything was gone. I stood in what used to be my living room, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might have a heart attack right there on the spot. This wasn't a robbery. This was something else entirely. My phone rang, startling me. Samuel's name appeared on the screen. My son-in-law, the man I'd welcomed into my family 3 years ago when he married my daughter, Aurora. "Paul," his voice was cheerful, almost sing-song. "You're back. How was Chicago?" "Samuel," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where is everything? Where are my belongings?" A pause, then a chuckle that made my skin crawl. "Oh, that? Yeah, we need to talk. Can you meet me at that little diner on Maple Street? You know the one." "We'll talk right here," I said, "in my house." "Actually," Samuel's voice took on a different tone, colder. "It's not your house anymore, but we'll get to that. Maple Street Diner. 20 minutes. The line went dead. I drove to the diner in a haze, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe there had been some kind of emergency. Maybe Aurora was in the hospital and they'd had to sell things quickly for medical expenses. Maybe this was all some terrible misunderstanding that could be explained away. Samuel was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a coffee cup in front of him. He looked relaxed, almost smug. He was wearing a new watch, a Rolex that I was certain he couldn't afford on his manager's salary at the electronics store. "Paul," he said, not bothering to stand up as I approached. "Sit down." I slid into the booth across from him, studying his face. Samuel had always been handsome in that clean-cut, all-American way that made Aurora's eyes light up. But there was something different about him now. Something harder. "Where's Aurora?" I asked. "She's fine. She's actually shopping right now." He smiled. "Buying some new things for our new place." "New place?" Samuel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He slid it across the table to me. "The deed of sale. Everything went through yesterday. $13 million, just like the appraisal said." I stared at the paper, the words swimming in front of my eyes. My signature was at the bottom, but I had never signed this document. I had never even seen it before. "This is forged," I said quietly. "Is it?" Samuel leaned back in his seat. "Funny thing about power of attorney documents, Paul. Remember when Aurora was worried about you traveling so much? She convinced you to sign those papers just in case something happened to you while you were away." The memory hit me like a punch to the gut. 6 months ago, Aurora had been crying, saying she'd heard horrible stories about people dying in plane crashes, and their families being left unable to access bank accounts or make important decisions. She'd begged me to sign papers giving her power of attorney just temporarily, just for peace of mind. That was for emergencies, I said. This was an emergency, Samuel replied smoothly. You see, I've got some debts, significant debts, and your daughter's lifestyle is expensive. We needed the money. I felt something crack inside my chest. You sold my house, my home, everything I own. Not everything, Samuel said, reaching into his other pocket. He pulled out a check and slid it across the table. Here's your cut. I looked down at the check. $5,000, made out to me, signed with Aurora's name. $5,000, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. Consider it a retirement gift, Samuel said, his smile widening. That's enough to get you a nice little apartment somewhere, maybe in one of those senior communities. You can play bingo and complain about your arthritis with the other old folks. Something strange happened then. Instead of exploding with rage, instead of lunging across the table to strangle him, I started laughing. It started as a quiet chuckle, but it grew louder, deeper, until other customers in the diner were turning to stare at us. Samuel's smug expression faltered. What's so funny? I wiped my eyes, still chuckling. Oh, Samuel, you have no idea what you've just done. What's that supposed to mean? I picked up the check, folded it carefully, and put it in my wallet. Then I stood up, straightening my jacket. Thank you for this, I said, patting my wallet. This is exactly what I needed. Samuel's confusion was almost comical. What are you talking about? I leaned down, placing both hands on the table, and looked him directly in the eyes. You think you're smart, don't you? You think you've outsmarted the old man? I have outsmarted you, Samuel said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. Here's the thing about chess, Samuel, I said quietly. The best players think 5 moves ahead. You've been planning this little stunt for, what, 6 months? Maybe a year? I straightened up, smiling. I've been planning my countermove for 2. I turned and walked toward the door, leaving Samuel sitting there with his mouth slightly open. Wait, he called after me. What countermove? What are you talking about? I paused at the door and looked back at him. Give Aurora my love. Tell her I'll be in touch soon. As I walked to my car, I could feel Samuel's eyes on me through the diner window. Let him wonder. Let him spend the next few days trying to figure out what I meant. Because the truth was, going to hit him harder than a freight train, and I wanted him to enjoy these last few moments of thinking he'd won. The boy had no idea who he was dealing with, but he was about to find out. The motel room was a far cry from my $13 million mansion, but it served its purpose. I sat on the edge of the sagging bed, staring at the cheap prints on the wall, letting Samuel's arrogance replay in my mind. $5,000. The insult was almost poetic in its cruelty. But what Samuel didn't know, what neither he nor Aurora realized, was that I'd been watching, waiting, and preparing for exactly this moment for months. It started last Christmas. I'd returned from the kitchen during our family dinner to find Samuel hunched over my home office desk, rifling through papers. When he saw me, he'd straightened up quickly, claiming he was looking for a pen to write down a recipe Aurora had mentioned. But I'd seen the way his eyes had lingered on my financial documents, the way his fingers had hesitated over my property deeds. That night, I'd installed a small security camera in my office. Nothing fancy, just a discreet device that would record anyone who entered when I wasn't home. What I discovered over the following weeks made my blood run cold. Samuel had been systematically photographing my documents, bank statements, investment portfolios, property records, insurance policies. He'd been building a complete picture of my financial life. But it wasn't just curiosity. He was planning something. The breaking point came in February. I'd been reviewing the camera footage when I saw Samuel on the phone in my office, speaking in hushed tones to someone. I'd managed to enhance the audio enough to catch fragments of the conversation. The old man's got way more than we thought, he'd said, rifling through my filing cabinet. Multiple properties, offshore accounts. We're talking at least 20 million, maybe more. There was a pause as he listened to whoever was on the other end. Don't worry about Aurora, he'd continued. She'll do whatever I tell her to do. She's completely under my thumb. The power of attorney papers were just the beginning. I'd saved that recording. along with several others. By March, I knew Samuel's plan. He was going to wait until I left for a business trip, then use Aurora's power of attorney to liquidate everything he could get his hands on. The house would be first. It was the biggest asset and the easiest to explain away. He'd probably tell Aurora that I'd decided to downsize, that I'd asked them to handle the sale while I was away. But here's what Samuel didn't understand about me. I didn't build a successful business by being reactive. I built it by being proactive. While he was plotting his little scheme, I was building my own. The first thing I did was contact my lawyer, Margaret Winters. She'd been handling my legal affairs for 15 years and was one of the few people I trusted completely. I told her everything: Samuel's suspicious behavior, the recordings, my fears about what he was planning. "We need to be careful," Margaret had warned me. "If Aurora has legitimate power of attorney, there's not much we can legally do to stop her from making financial decisions on your behalf." "Then we don't stop her," I'd said. "We let her do exactly what Samuel wants her to do." Margaret had looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Paul, you're talking about potentially losing millions of dollars." "Am I?" I'd smiled. "Or am I talking about exposing a fraud and protecting what's really important?" That's when I'd explained my plan. The mansion that Samuel had sold wasn't technically mine. 3 months ago, I'd transferred ownership to a family trust that I'd established years earlier but never activated. The trust was controlled by a board of trustees, all close friends and business associates who'd agreed to act on my behalf. Samuel's forged documents could sell the house, but they couldn't touch the trust or its assets. But that was just the beginning. The trust didn't just own the house. It owned everything. My investment portfolio, my offshore accounts, my real estate holdings in Colorado and Florida, even my classic car collection. Everything had been quietly transferred months ago. What Samuel had stolen was essentially an empty shell. The house itself, yes, but none of the real wealth that made it valuable. And because the sale had been conducted using forged documents and false pretenses, it would be easy enough to prove fraud and reverse the transaction. But I wasn't ready to play that card yet. Not until I understood the full scope of Samuel's betrayal. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Aurora's name appeared on the screen. My heart clenched. Whatever Samuel's sins, Aurora was still my daughter, still the little girl who used to fall asleep in my lap while I read her bedtime stories. "Daddy," her voice was small, uncertain. "Samuel told me about your meeting today." "Did he now?" I kept my voice neutral. "He said you were upset about the house, but Daddy, you said you wanted to downsize. You said the place was too big for just you. Don't you remember?" The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost believed Samuel had convinced himself it was true. "What exactly did I say, sweetheart?" "Before you left for Chicago, you said the house held too many memories of Mom, and that you wanted a fresh start somewhere smaller. You asked me to handle the sale while you were gone so you wouldn't have to deal with the emotional stress of being there during the process." My hands tightened on the phone. Samuel had been thorough. He'd not only forged my signature, but had also created an entire false narrative to explain his actions. Aurora genuinely believed she was helping me. "And the money from the sale?" I asked carefully. "Samuel said you wanted us to put most of it into investments for our future. He's handling all of that. He gave you some cash to get started in your new place, right? $5,000? I had to bite my tongue to keep from exploding. Samuel had told her he'd given me spending money while he invested the rest. In reality, he'd probably already moved the $13 million into accounts she couldn't access. "Aurora," I said gently, "I need you to do something for me." "Of course, Daddy. Anything." "Wow. I need you to ask Samuel to show you the investment accounts where he put the money from the house sale. I want to see the paperwork." There was a long pause. "Why don't you just ask him yourself?" "Because I want to see how he reacts when you ask him." "Daddy, that sounds like you don't trust him." "Do you trust him, Aurora?" Another pause, longer this time. "Of course I do. He's my husband." But there was something in her voice, a tiny crack in the certainty. Samuel had been sloppy somewhere. She'd seen something that didn't add up. "Ask him," I said again, "tonight, and pay attention to his answer." After Aurora hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of the motel room, thinking about my next move. Samuel thought he'd destroyed me, but he'd actually given me the perfect weapon. By stealing from me so brazenly, by involving Aurora in his scheme, he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Tomorrow I would begin the process of taking back everything he'd stolen, but more importantly, I would begin the process of showing Aurora who she'd really married. My phone buzzed with a text message from Margaret. "The trustees have voted. We're ready to proceed whenever you give the word." I typed back, "Not yet. I want Samuel to feel secure for a few more days. Let him think he's won." I had a feeling that Aurora's conversation with Samuel tonight was going to be very illuminating. And once she started asking questions, really asking questions, the house of cards Samuel had built would start to crumble. The boy had made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed that because I was older, I was weaker. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The call came at 2:37 in the morning. Aurora's name flashed on my phone screen, and I knew immediately that my request had yielded results. Her voice was shaky, confused, and underneath it all, I could hear the first traces of doubt that would eventually consume everything Samuel had built. "Daddy, I need to see you," she whispered, as if afraid someone might overhear. "Can you meet me somewhere? Somewhere private?" "Where's Samuel?" He's asleep. I told him I was going to the pharmacy for headache medicine." I gave her the address of an all-night diner 20 minutes away from the luxury apartment complex where they were now living, paid for, no doubt, with my money. As I dressed and drove through the empty streets, I thought about how this moment had been inevitable from the day Samuel first walked into our lives. Aurora was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she clearly hadn't touched. She looked older somehow, as if the events of the past 24 hours had aged her. Her usually perfect blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wasn't wearing makeup. This was Aurora, stripped of all pretense, raw and vulnerable. "Daddy," she said as I slid into the seat across from her, "I asked Samuel about the investment accounts." "And?" Her hands tightened around the coffee cup. "He got angry, really angry. He said I was questioning his judgment, that I was acting like I didn't trust him." She looked up at me with eyes that reminded me so much of her mother's. But that's not what bothered me. I waited, letting her find the words. What bothered me was how he answered. He was too smooth, too prepared, like he'd rehearsed what to say if someone asked that question. She took a shaky breath. And when I pressed him for specifics, for account numbers or statements, he said the investments were complicated and that I wouldn't understand them. "Did you believe him?" Aurora was quiet for a long moment. "I wanted to. God, Daddy, I wanted to believe him so badly, but then I remembered something Mom used to say." "What's that?" "She said that when someone really loves you, they never make you feel stupid for asking questions. They explain things patiently, even if it takes time." Tears started to well up in her eyes. "Samuel made me feel stupid. He made me feel like I was being paranoid and unreasonable." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You're not stupid, Aurora. You're asking exactly the right questions. But if he's lying about the investments, that means—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "It means he stole from me," I said gently, "and he used you to do it." The tears came then, silent and devastating. I moved around to her side of the booth and put my arm around her, just like I used to when she was little and had scraped her knee or been frightened by a thunderstorm. "I'm so sorry, Daddy," she whispered against my shoulder. "I signed those papers. I trusted him. I helped him do this to you." "Aurora, listen to me very carefully," I said, pulling back so I could look at her. "This is not your fault. Samuel is a predator. He identified you as a target, studied your weaknesses, and manipulated you into doing what he wanted. That doesn't make you stupid. That makes you human." She wiped her eyes with a napkin. "But what do we do now? The house is sold. The money is gone. Even if we prove Samuel is lying, how do we get any of it back?" This was the moment I'd been building toward, the moment when I could finally reveal the first layer of my plan. "Aurora," I said carefully, "what if I told you that the house was only worth about 10% of my actual net worth?" She blinked, confusion replacing the tears. "What do you mean?" "I mean that while Samuel was planning his little scheme, I was planning my own. The mansion he sold? It was just one property out of many, and not even the most valuable one. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo I'd taken the previous day. It was a sprawling ranch house in Colorado, set against the backdrop of snow-capped mountains. The house was massive, easily twice the size of the mansion Samuel had sold. "This is where I've been spending my extended business trips for the past year," I said. "It's been in the family trust for almost 2 decades. Samuel never knew it existed." Aurora stared at the photo. "You own this?" "The trust owns this, along with a beachfront property in Florida, a cabin in Maine, and a portfolio of commercial real estate worth about $40 million. I swiped to the next photo showing the Florida house. Samuel thought he was stealing my entire fortune. In reality, he got about $13 million out of roughly $60. The color drained from Aurora's face. $60 million? Give or take a few million, depending on current market valuations. I put the phone away. "Your mother and I were very careful about diversifying our assets. We never put all our eggs in one basket. But why didn't you tell me about any of this?" "Because I wanted to see how far Samuel would go, and because I needed to know whether you were part of his plan or just another victim." Aurora flinched at the word victim, but she didn't argue. "So what happens now?" "Now, we expose Samuel for what he really is. But, Aurora, I need you to understand something. This is going to get ugly. Samuel isn't going to just roll over and admit what he's done. He's going to fight, and he's going to try to turn you against me. He already has been," she said quietly. "Ever since you left for Chicago, he's been saying things about you. Little comments about how you're getting old, how you're not thinking clearly, how you need people to make decisions for you." The manipulation was even worse than I'd suspected. "What else has he said?" "He's been pushing me to suggest that you should maybe consider assisted living. He said it would be better for everyone if you had professional caregivers." Aurora looked ashamed. "I almost believed him, Daddy. There were moments when I thought maybe he was right. Maybe you weren't capable of handling your own affairs anymore." A cold rage settled in my chest. Samuel hadn't just been after my money. He'd been systematically undermining my relationship with my daughter, setting the stage for complete control over both our lives. "Aurora, I need you to do something for me, and it's going to be difficult." "What?" "I need you to go home and act like nothing has changed. Don't let Samuel know we've talked. Don't ask any more questions about the investments. Just watch him. Listen to what he says. Pay attention to how he treats you." "You want me to spy on my own husband?" "I want you to see him clearly, without the fog of manipulation he's been creating." I took her hands in mine. "I'm going to give you a phone, a different one. If you need to reach me, use that phone. Samuel might be monitoring your regular phone." Aurora looked skeptical. "You think he's monitoring my phone?" "I think Samuel is capable of anything. And I think you're just beginning to understand how deep this goes." As we prepared to leave the diner, Aurora grabbed my arm. "Daddy, what if you're wrong? What if there's some explanation for all of this?" I looked at my daughter, seeing the woman she'd become, but also the little girl who used to believe that monsters only existed in fairy tales. "Then I'll be the happiest man in the world to be wrong," I said. "But Aurora, I've been in business for 30 years. I know when someone is running a con, and your husband is running the longest, most elaborate con I've ever seen." As I watched her drive away, heading back to the apartment where Samuel was sleeping peacefully, believing he'd gotten away with the perfect crime, I felt a mixture of sadness and anticipation. Sadness for what Aurora was about to learn about the man she'd married, anticipation for what was coming next, because Samuel's theft of the mansion was just the beginning. The real revelations, the ones that would destroy not just his plans, but his entire sense of reality, were still to come. And tomorrow, I would begin the process of showing him that when you steal from someone, you better make sure you know everything about them first. 3 days passed before Aurora used the phone I'd given her. When it finally rang, her voice was different, harder, more certain, but also more frightened than I'd ever heard her. "Daddy, we need to meet. I found something." This time, she chose the location, a small park on the outskirts of town where she used to play as a child. I found her sitting on the same swing set where I'd pushed her countless times when she was little, But now she looked like a woman who'd seen too much. "He's been lying about everything," she said without preamble, as I sat on the swing beside her. "Not just the investments. Everything." I waited for her to continue, watching as she pulled a folder from her purse with trembling hands. "Yesterday, while Samuel was at work, I went through his things. Really went through them. I found papers hidden in a box in our bedroom closet." She opened the folder and pulled out a stack of documents. "Look at this." The first document made my blood run cold. It was a background check on Aurora, dated 6 months before they'd supposedly met by chance at a coffee shop. Every detail of her life was there: where she worked, where she lived, her daily routines, her relationship history, even her favorite restaurants. "He researched me, Daddy, for months before we ever spoke to each other." I flipped through the pages, seeing my own information scattered throughout. My net worth, my business holdings, my travel schedule. Samuel had built a complete dossier on our family before he'd ever introduced himself to Aurora. "There's more," Aurora said, handing me another document. This one was a printed email exchange between Samuel and someone named Marcus. The timestamps showed conversations spanning over a year, starting from before Samuel had met Aurora. "The blonde is perfect," one email read. "Single, lonely, daddy issues from her mother's death. Father is loaded and travels constantly for business. She's desperate for someone to take care of her." "Take your time with this one," Marcus had replied. "Rich girl like that, you play it right, you're set for life. Don't rush it." "Trust me," Samuel had written back. "By the time I'm done, she'll do anything I ask, and the old man will never see it coming." I felt something crack inside my chest as I read the casual way they discussed Aurora's vulnerabilities, her grief over her mother's death, her loneliness. To them, she wasn't a person, she was a target. "Aurora," I said gently, "how are you handling this?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Honestly, part of me is relieved. For the past year, I've felt like I was going crazy. Samuel would say things, then deny he'd said them. He'd make plans, then claim I'd misunderstood. He'd disappear for hours and come back with stories that didn't quite add up." She wiped her eyes. "I thought I was losing my mind." "That's called gaslighting," I said. "It's a manipulation tactic. He was deliberately making you doubt your own perceptions." "What? But why? If he just wanted money, why not just steal it and disappear? Why marry me? Why keep up the charade for so long?" I hesitated, looking at the next document in the folder. This one was going to hurt her even more than the others. "Because, sweetheart, you weren't just his target. You were his cover story." I showed her the email that explained everything. Samuel had been planning this con for over 2 years, but he'd needed a way to get close enough to me to understand my finances and gain access to my assets. Marrying Aurora wasn't just about money, it was about position. As my son-in-law, he had legitimate reasons to be around my house, to ask questions about my business, to gain my trust. "He never loved me," Aurora said, and it wasn't a question. "No, sweetheart. I don't think he's capable of loving anyone." Aurora was quiet for a long time, slowly swinging back and forth. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but cold. "There's something else you need to know, about why I signed those power of attorney papers so easily." I waited. "Samuel told me you were showing signs of dementia. He said you'd had several episodes where you'd forgotten important things, made questionable business decisions. He said you were too proud to admit you needed help, but that he was worried about you." He turned to look at me. He was very convincing. He had specific examples, dates, conversations. I believed every word. The scope of Samuel's manipulation was staggering. He'd spent months planting seeds of doubt about my mental capacity, setting the stage for Aurora to believe that taking control of my finances was necessary for my own protection. "He showed me forged medical reports," Aurora continued. "Documents that looked like they came from your doctor, suggesting you were in the early stages of cognitive decline." I felt a surge of admiration for Samuel's thoroughness, even as I despised everything about him. This wasn't a simple theft. This was psychological warfare, carefully planned and expertly executed. "Aurora, there's something I need to tell you," I said. "Something I've never told anyone, not even your mother." She looked at me with curiosity and concern. "Samuel isn't the first person to try to con our family. When you were 5 years old, a A man approached your mother at the grocery store. He seemed charming, helpful. He started showing up places where she shopped, offering to carry her groceries, making friendly conversation. What happened? I hired a private investigator to check him out. Turns out he was a professional con artist who specialized in targeting wealthy widows and single mothers. He'd done this dozens of times before. I took a deep breath. That experience taught me to be very careful about who we let into our lives. It's why I was so thorough about checking out every boyfriend you brought home, why I sometimes seemed overprotective. But you didn't check out Samuel. I did. But Samuel was better than the others. He'd created an entire false identity, complete with employment history, references, even college transcripts. It took my investigator almost 6 months to uncover the truth. Aurora stared at me. You knew? You knew what he was before I married him? I suspected, but I didn't have proof, and you were so happy. I made the mistake of thinking I could protect you while still letting you have your happiness. I looked down at my hands. I was wrong. I should have told you everything from the beginning. What else haven't you told me? This was the moment I'd been dreading, the revelation that would change everything between us. But after everything Samuel had done, Aurora deserved the complete truth. Your mother wasn't your biological mother, I said quietly. The swing stopped moving. Aurora turned to stare at me, her face pale. What did you mean? Your biological mother was a young woman named Sarah. She was 17 when you were born. She couldn't take care of you, and she wanted you to have a better life. I reached into my jacket and pulled out an envelope I'd been carrying for 3 days, waiting for the right moment. Catherine and I couldn't have children of our own. We adopted you when you were 3 months old. Aurora took the envelope with hands that weren't quite steady. Inside were the adoption papers, along with several photos of a teenage girl with Aurora's exact same blonde hair and green eyes. This is my mother? My real mother? Sarah died in a car accident when you were 12. But before she died, she wrote you a letter. I've been saving it for when you were ready. Aurora opened the letter, her eyes scanning the handwritten pages. As she read, tears began flowing down her cheeks, but she didn't make a sound. She loved me, Aurora whispered finally. She loved you enough to give you up, and Catherine loved you enough to raise you as her own. You were never unloved, Aurora, never unwanted. But why are you telling me this now? Because Samuel knows. Aurora's head snapped up. What? It's in his research files. He knows about the adoption, about Sarah, about everything. And I think he's been saving that information as leverage. I paused. I think he was planning to use it against you if you ever tried to leave him. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Samuel had uncovered Aurora's most fundamental secret and was prepared to weaponize it. My whole life is a lie, Aurora said, but there was no despair in her voice. Instead, there was something else, a growing anger that I recognized because I felt it too. No, I said firmly. Your life is exactly what it's always been. You're my daughter. Catherine was your mother in every way that mattered. The only thing that's changed is that now you know Samuel never deserved any of it. Aurora stood up from the swing, folding the letter carefully and putting it back in the envelope. When she looked at me, her eyes held a determination I hadn't seen since she was a child. What do we do now? Now we stop playing defense and start playing offense. What does that mean? I smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, it felt genuine. It means Samuel is about to learn that some secrets are more dangerous than others. And the biggest secret of all is one he's never even suspected. As we walked back to our cars, Aurora asked one more question. Daddy, how long have you known about Samuel's real identity? Almost from the beginning, but I let him think he was fooling me because I wanted to see how far he'd go. I paused by my car door. Tomorrow he's going to find out that the man he thought he was conning has been playing a much longer game than he ever imagined. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. Aurora had been playing her part perfectly for 4 days, acting like the dutiful wife who suspected nothing. But Samuel was sharper than I'd given him credit for, and apparently he'd noticed the subtle changes in her behavior. It was Aurora who called me first, her voice tight with controlled panic. He knows, she said without preamble. Samuel knows that I know. What happened? He found the second phone. I thought I'd hidden it well, but he was going through my purse when I came out of the shower this morning." Her voice was shaking. "Daddy, he's not the same person. When I tried to explain, he grabbed my wrist so hard I thought he was going to break it." The rage that shot through me was immediate and primal. "Where are you now?" "I'm in my car outside the grocery store. I told him I was going shopping, but I don't think he believed me. He said we're going to have a family meeting when I get home. He wants you there." "Did he hurt you?" "Not really. But Daddy, I've never seen him like this. It's like the mask just fell off. He's not even pretending to be nice anymore." I closed my eyes, thinking quickly. This wasn't how I'd planned to reveal everything, but Samuel had forced my hand. "Aurora, I need you to drive to Margaret's office. Do you remember my lawyer, Margaret Winters?" "Yes, but why?" "Because what's about to happen next is going to require legal documentation. And because I want you somewhere safe when Samuel realizes exactly how badly he's miscalculated." Just an hour later, Aurora and I sat in Margaret's conference room, surrounded by boxes of documents that represented months of careful preparation. Margaret had been working overtime to ensure that every aspect of my plan was legally sound and bulletproof. "Are you ready for this?" Margaret asked Aurora, her expression sympathetic but professional. "What your father is about to show Samuel, it's going to destroy your marriage completely. There won't be any coming back from this." Aurora nodded, her jaw set with determination. "My marriage was destroyed the day Samuel decided to steal from my father. I just didn't know it yet." My phone rang. Samuel's number appeared on the screen, and I could practically feel his desperation through the device. "Paul?" His voice was tighter than I'd ever heard it. "We need to talk, now." "I agree," I said calmly. "Maple Street Diner, 1 hour." "No, my apartment. This is a family matter." "Samuel, you lost the right to dictate terms when you forged my signature and stole my house. Maple Street Diner, or we don't talk at all." The line went dead, but I knew he'd be there. He was too desperate not to be. "Time to go," I told Aurora. The diner was nearly empty when we arrived. Samuel was already there, pacing back and forth in the parking lot like a caged animal. When he saw Aurora get out of my car, his expression shifted from anxiety to fury. "What the hell is this?" he demanded as we approached. "Aurora, you were supposed to come home. We had an agreement." "We had a lot of things," Aurora replied coldly, "most of them based on lies." Samuel's mask slipped even further. "Get in the car, we're going home, and we're going to sort this out like adults." "No," Aurora said simply. "We're going to sort this out right here, right now." We went inside and claimed the same corner booth where this whole confrontation had started a week ago. Samuel looked haggard, desperate, but there was still a calculating intelligence in his eyes. He wasn't going down without a fight. "Okay," he said once we were seated. "Cards on the table. Aurora told you about the phone. You know she's been talking to me." He leaned forward, his voice taking on a reasonable tone. "But before this gets out of hand, you need to understand something. Everything I did was for Aurora, for our future." "Really?" I said. "Tell me, Samuel, what part of researching my daughter for 6 months before you met her was for her benefit?" His face went white. "What are you talking about?" Aurora placed the folder of documents on the table between us. "We found your research files, Samuel, all of them." "The background check on Aurora," I continued, opening the folder and spreading the papers across the table. "The emails with your partner, Marcus, about targeting my lonely daughter. The forged medical reports about my supposed dementia." Samuel stared at the documents, his breathing shallow. "Where did you get these?" "From your apartment," Aurora said. "Yesterday while you were at work. Funny thing about those investment accounts, you couldn't show me details about. They don't exist. But your correspondence with 3 other women you've conned over the past 5 years, that was very real." I watched Samuel's face as the full scope of his exposure sank in. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was about his entire criminal operation. 3 other women, I repeated. Margaret Blackwood in Phoenix, 62 years old, widowed, lost $400,000. Jennifer Reeves in Dallas, 55, divorced, lost her entire retirement fund of $600,000. Patricia Morrison in Denver, 68, lost her house and her savings account, totaling $800,000. "You're lying," Samuel said, but his voice lacked conviction. Aurora pulled out her phone and played an audio recording. Samuel's voice came through clearly, talking to someone on the phone. The old lady in Denver was perfect. Lonely, wealthy, and completely trusting. I had her convinced to sign over her house within 3 months. Paul's going to take longer, but the payoff will be worth it. Samuel lunged across the table, trying to grab the phone, but I caught his wrist. "Sit down," I said quietly. "We're not finished." "You have no idea what you're dealing with," Samuel snarled. "I have information about both of you that could destroy your lives." "You mean Aurora's adoption?" I asked. "Yes, we've discussed that. Quite thoroughly, actually." Samuel's confidence faltered. That's not the only thing." "What else do you have, Samuel?" Aurora asked. "Please, enlighten us." "Your father isn't the saint you think he is," Samuel said desperately. "He's been laundering money through his business for years. I have documentation." I started laughing. I couldn't help it. The desperation in his voice, the wild accusations, it was almost pathetic. "Samuel," I said, wiping my eyes, "you spent months researching my business, and that's the best you could come up with? Money laundering?" "I have proof." "You have forged documents that you created yourself," I interrupted. "Just like the medical reports about my dementia, just like the investment statements you've been showing Aurora. The only criminal in this room is you." Margaret chose that moment to enter the diner, carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of someone who was about to deliver very bad news. She slid into the booth next to Aurora. "Samuel Morrison," she said formally, "or should I say Samuel Kellerman? Or perhaps Michael Thompson? Those are the other identities you've been using, correct?" Samuel's face went gray. "Who are you?" "Margaret Winters, attorney at law. I represent Paul Harrison, and as of today, Aurora Harrison." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. "I have here warrants for your arrest on charges of fraud, identity theft, forgery, and elder abuse in 3 states. The FBI has been very interested in your activities." "This is harassment," Samuel said, but his voice was shaking. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, we can prove everything," Margaret continued. "You see, Paul has been cooperating with federal investigators for the past 6 months. Every conversation you've had with Aurora has been recorded. Every financial transaction has been traced. Every forged document has been analyzed." The blood drained from Samuel's face. "That's impossible." I was careful. "You were careful about some things," I agreed. "But you made one crucial mistake. You assumed I was just a lonely old man who'd be easy to manipulate. What you didn't realize is that I've been investigating financial crimes for the government as a consultant for over 15 years. Samuel stared at me in shock. "What?" "My pharmaceutical consulting business is real, but it's not my only job. I help the FBI identify and track sophisticated financial criminals." I smiled. "And when you started researching me, Samuel, I was already researching you." "The house sale," Samuel said slowly, pieces clicking into place. "You let me steal the house." "I facilitated your theft of the house," I corrected, "with full government oversight and documentation. Every step you took was being recorded as evidence." Aurora looked at me with amazement. "You've been working with the FBI this whole time?" "From the moment I suspected Samuel wasn't who he claimed to be. The trust that owns my real assets, it's actually a federal asset protection program for people who assist with long-term criminal investigations." Margaret stood up, pulling a pair of handcuffs from her briefcase. "Samuel Kellerman, you're under arrest." Samuel's desperate eyes darted between Aurora and me. "Aurora, you can't let them do this. We're married. I love you." Aurora looked at him with an expression I'd never seen before, complete disgust, mixed with pity. "No, Samuel," she said quietly. "You don't love anyone. You don't even know what love is." As Margaret read Samuel his rights, he made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "You think this is over?" he shouted at me. "There are others, people who know about your operation. They'll come for you next." I leaned forward, my voice calm and steady. "Samuel, those others you're talking about, Marcus and the rest of your criminal network, they've been in federal custody for 3 days. We've been rolling up your entire operation systematically." The fight went out of him then, his shoulders sagging as the full reality of his situation hit him. As Margaret led him away in handcuffs, Aurora and I sat in silence for several minutes. "Is it really over?" she asked finally. "The criminal case?" "Yes. Samuel and his associates are going to prison for a very long time." I reached across the table and took her hand. "But for us? For our family? I think this is just the beginning." 6 months later, I stood on the deck of my Colorado ranch house, watching Aurora teach her pottery class to a group of local women. The sound of their laughter carried across the valley, mixing with the gentle mountain breeze that had become the soundtrack to our new life. The criminal trials had been swift and decisive. Samuel, whose real name turned out to be David Michael Kellerman, received a sentence of 18 years in federal prison. His network of accomplices received similar sentences, and the FBI recovered over $3 million for their various victims. The women Samuel had previously conned finally had some measure of justice and, more importantly, most of their money returned. Aurora had handled the divorce proceedings with a strength that reminded me of her mother. She'd refused any settlement, wanting nothing that had come from Samuel's crimes. The apartment they'd shared, the car he'd bought, even the jewelry he'd given her, she'd walked away from all of it without looking back. "I don't want anything that was purchased with stolen money," she'd told the divorce attorney. "Let it all go back to the victims." Now she was building something entirely new. The pottery studio had been her idea, a way to work with her hands and create something beautiful after months of dealing with ugly truths. She'd discovered a talent for teaching, and the local women had embraced her warmly, never treating her like the victim of a con artist, but simply as Aurora, the woman who made beautiful things and had a gift for helping others find their own creativity. Margaret climbed the deck steps carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing a satisfied smile. Even 6 months later, she still looked pleased with how everything had turned out. "The last of the asset recovery is complete," she said, handing me a cup. "The house in Sacramento has been fully restored to the trust, and all liens have been removed. Samuel's attempt to mortgage it during those final weeks has been nullified." "Good," I said, "though I'm not sure what I'll do with it now." "Aurora might have some ideas about that," Margaret said, nodding toward the studio where my daughter was helping an elderly woman center clay on a pottery wheel. She was right. Over the past months, Aurora had mentioned several times that the old house would make a perfect retreat center for women rebuilding their lives after traumatic experiences. She'd seen firsthand how art therapy could help people process difficult emotions, and she wanted to create a place where others could find the same healing she'd discovered. "There's something else," Margaret continued. "The FBI wants to offer you a permanent consulting position, full-time, based out of Denver, with a salary that would make your pharmaceutical consulting look like pocket change." I considered this. The work with the FBI had been satisfying in a way my business had never been, helping to catch people like Samuel, protecting potential victims, using my skills to serve a larger purpose. It had given my life a meaning I hadn't realized was missing. Would it require travel? Some. But you'd have a choice in assignments and you could structure it around your schedule here. When had I started thinking of this place as here instead of the Colorado house? When had this mountain valley become home instead of just another property? The answer came to me as I watched Aurora guide her students through their work with infinite patience. It had become home the day Aurora moved in with me, the day she'd stopped being a victim and started being a survivor. The screen door opened, and Aurora emerged from the house, wiping clay-stained hands on her apron. She'd let her hair grow longer, and the mountain sun had brought out freckles I hadn't seen since she was a child. She looked healthier than she had in years, more herself. "Margaret," she said warmly, "are you staying for dinner? I'm making Mom's lasagna recipe." "The one from Catherine's cookbook?" Margaret asked. I wouldn't miss it. Aurora had been exploring her connection to Catherine over the past months, cooking from the recipe collection Catherine had left behind, looking through photo albums, sharing memories. Learning about her adoption hadn't diminished her love for the woman who'd raised her. If anything, it had deepened her appreciation for the choice Catherine had made to love her as completely as any biological mother could. "Dad," Aurora said, "there's something I want to talk to you about." Both of you, actually. We settled into the comfortable outdoor furniture I'd bought for the deck, Aurora curling up in the chair where she liked to drink her morning coffee and watch the sunrise over the mountains. "I've been thinking about the Sacramento house," she began, "and about what you said about the FBI consulting work. And I want to turn the house into a residential program for women who've been victims of financial elder abuse. A place where they can stay while they rebuild their lives, learn new skills, maybe discover talents they never knew they had." Her eyes were bright with enthusiasm. "We could offer legal assistance, financial counseling, art therapy, make it a real sanctuary." Margaret leaned forward, her lawyer instincts engaged. "That's a substantial undertaking. The licensing requirements alone would be significant." "I know," Aurora said. "That's why I want to go back to school. Get my degree in social work, maybe specialize in trauma counseling." She looked at me. "But only if you think it's a good idea. It is your house." "Aurora," I said gently, "everything I have is yours. It always has been. If you want to turn the house into a sanctuary for women, then that's what we'll do. And the FBI job? I think I'll take it. Catching more people like Samuel sounds like the best possible use of my remaining years." Aurora smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like Catherine had on our wedding day, radiant with possibility and hope. "There's one more thing," she said. "I got a letter yesterday from Sarah's sister." I felt my breath catch. Aurora's biological mother had mentioned a sister in the letter she'd written, but we'd never tried to contact her. "She saw the news coverage about Samuel's arrest," Aurora continued. "She recognized my name and put the pieces together. She wants to meet me." "How do you feel about that?" "Nervous, excited, curious." Aurora wrapped her arms around her knees. "I want to know more about Sarah, about where I came from. But I also want her to understand that Catherine was my real mother, that you're my real father. That family isn't just about blood." "I think that's exactly what Sarah would have wanted," I said. "For you to be loved and to know your worth." As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. Samuel's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been revelatory. It had stripped away illusions and forced us to confront truths we'd been avoiding. More importantly, it had brought Aurora and me closer than we'd been since Catherine's death. In fighting Samuel together, we'd remembered how to be a family. "Dad," Aurora said suddenly, "do you think Mom would be proud of us? Of what we built here?" I looked at my daughter. Adopted or not, she was mine in every way that mattered, and felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. "I think Catherine would be amazed," I said. "I think she'd love seeing you discover your strength, your purpose. And I think she'd love knowing that even though someone tried to destroy our family, we came back stronger." "And Sarah?" Aurora asked quietly. "Do you think she'd be proud too?" "I think Sarah made the hardest decision a mother can make because she wanted you to have the best possible life. And look at you now. You're planning to dedicate your life to helping other women who've been hurt, who need hope." I smiled. "I think both of your mothers would be incredibly proud." Later that evening, after Margaret had gone home and Aurora had finished cleaning up from her pottery class, we sat together on the deck under a canopy of stars that seemed impossible in their brightness and number. "I have something for you," Aurora said, reaching into her pocket and pulling out a small wrapped package. Inside was a clay medallion, roughly circular, but perfectly imperfect, glazed in shades of blue and green that reminded me of mountain lakes. In the center, she'd carved a simple image, 2 hands, one larger and one smaller, clasped together. "I made it in class today," she said. "I wanted you to have something to remind you that no matter what happens, no matter how far we travel for your FBI work or how busy we get with the sanctuary, we're connected. Family." I held the medallion in my palm, feeling the slight roughness of the glaze, the weight of the clay, the love that had shaped it. "It's perfect," I said and meant it. As I looked out over the valley that had become our sanctuary, I thought about Samuel sitting in his federal prison cell, probably still convinced that he'd been the victim of some elaborate conspiracy. He'd never understand that his real crime wasn't stealing money. It was failing to recognize the value of what he'd tried to destroy. He'd seen Aurora as a mark, a lonely woman to be manipulated. He'd seen me as an aging fool, easy prey for a clever predator. But he'd never seen what we really were, a family that had weathered loss and grief and found ways to love each other anyway. His theft had been temporary. Our connection was permanent. The mountain air was cool and clean, filled with the scent of pine and the promise of tomorrow. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called to its mate, and I heard the answering call echo across the valley. I was 58 years old, and I was finally home.